Hello, welcome to the fifth episode of the 12th series of the Temple of Surf, the podcast. Today with us from California is former pro surfer and surf author Jamie Brisick. We discuss with him about surf, surfers, surf history, pro surfing, and much more. Welcome, Jamie. Welcome to the show. Where are you today?
Thank you, Alessandro. I'm in Sonoma, which is in Northern California. LA has been burning for the last week, and it's incredibly anxious times. I was there for most of it, and then I drove. I just sort of had to get away. So I'm in Northern California.
Yeah, it's a very tragic time. You know, we see from far, of course, at least us, that we are on this side of the ocean, and like all those legendary places that we always drive through, or we just like see when we visit LA and the cities nearby. It's crazy. It's crazy what's going to happen. What's actually is happening, and. And I was listening a few podcasts that you have done in the past, and it's not your first time that you deal with fires. So I guess for you is even more stressful, or maybe I don't know how to. I don't know what I would do in such a situation. So
yeah, I lost pretty much everything I own 6 years ago in the Woolsey fire, and so to watch this, it's such a it's a combination of PTSD and also a kind of deja vu where it's also familiar. But yeah, I think I'm kind of in shock. And I think, I have so many friends who lost their homes. The Malibu that has been my home and that I've loved for most of my life is going to be entirely different, because so many it's always such a happy, sunshiny place that we see in music videos with the palm trees and the sunshine and the fancy cars and the beautiful homes. And it looks very different right now. So it's kind of too soon to even. I keep speaking with good friends, and we say, and I keep trying to remind them and myself that it's too soon to say anything. We're just processing, and we don't know what it's going to be,
But out of the podcast, if there is anything I can do, just let me know.
Thank you, Alessandro. I appreciate that.
Surf community comes together in these difficult times all the time, right? So
that is the nice part, absolutely, and that's happening right now. It's wonderful, actually.
Yeah, exactly. We are all good to see that we are all connected in the difficult time. At least it's a good place. So I have many questions for you today, but the first, because there is one that always starts the podcast and 6 that always end the podcast. So we go for the first one. In your opinion, what is the most important thing in surfing?
Most important thing in surfing? Do you mean that in terms of the joy of surfing, or do you mean that in what is a good surfer?
And like you want to answer, now I have so many different answers, so it's up to you how you want to.
Yeah, I appreciate that. For me, I think it's a feeling of freedom and escape. I think it's interesting for me because I think the thing that drew me to surfing when I was very, very young was the sense of being in the ocean and being kind of away from the constraints of life, the constraints of my mother and father. There was just a sense of, how to say, like in something that is so unfamiliar in many ways, which is the ocean, which is really not what with our, humans are, it's not necessarily our terrain, but just the bobbing around in the water, having nothing to really grab onto, right? Like it's such a fascinating metaphor in terms of how our lives are. And certainly as I get older in my life, I see more and more, which is, there's this Buddhist term, groundlessness, where you really have nothing under your feet. You may think there is, but I mean, the fires right now are a great example of it. We get it in various ways. We get it in our relationships. We get it in every way. We think we have something solid. We get it in our careers. And I think somehow that in a quiet way, I was kind of experiencing that. And then I was a professional surfer and it became my vocation, and it became something else. And then I kind of came back to the original part, which was just like being out in the water and feeling free and feeling light and the sense of play and a sense of fun. And that is the thing that I value most. So it's really not about, I try not to make it about performance, because when I do, I just get disappointed. I'm humbled. I think I was a better surfer before, but I think just the sense, those moments where you get lost and you forget about everything and you're just in the water enjoying, and you're almost more like you become like a sea creature in some way, where your instincts are attuned to how to find that wave and what to do on that wave and how to move with that wave. And that's my favorite thing. It's not necessarily about like big serious waves at all. It can happen in tiny waves. Last year around this time, I was in Hawaii, and with a friend and his girlfriend, we surfed. We rented soft tops and we went out at canoes in Waikiki, and they were tiny little soft waves. And we had the best session, and the sun was setting, and there were all these lovely tourists all around us who were surfing for the first time, and they were happy. So for me, I don't need to be in some like slab reef in, Indonesia. It's more of like a feeling that just comes.
Yeah. It's what connects all of us surfers at a certain time. It's like you were talking about this sensation of feeling light. In effect, we are quite heavy. I mean, at least me, I'm 100 kilo of pure Italian beef, and in the water, and in the water, I feel like light, right? And
Yeah.
the water sustain ourselves and make everything, even the problem, even inside our mind, everything gets into a different dimension even. So
Yeah, that second part is the one that I think most of all, as I think the noise in our heads it's sometimes hard to quiet. And the ocean can be very good that way. Being out in the surf and being in the waves can definitely quiet that down.
yeah. So it is incredible. Like you were saying, we are creatures that are living on the earth, on the land, but in reality, we feel better if we stay in the water.
Yes. No, absolutely. And it's really interesting because having observed a lot of surfers over the years, I can think of so many that really gifted surfers who are kind of better in the water than they are on land. Like their magic in the ocean, their magic on a surfboard is one thing, but then in their personal lives, they struggle, And I'm always fascinated by that, where, yeah, I guess just that thing that you can get from the water, where there was that great documentary on the surfer Clay Marzo, and the title was Just Add Water. And I thought that was such a brilliant, brilliant title.
It is.
Directed by Jamie Turney. Well, great film.
Yeah. It's just like if you want, it tells everything about us. In effect,
Yes.
to add water. It's like a recipe. Which it's good for the pasta for sure to add water. There will be a lot of Italian stuff during this podcast. I'm sorry about it.
No, I love it. To keep the Italian coming.
Yeah.
You're gonna make me hungry. It's 8:30 a.m. here, but I'm gonna go have like a pasta breakfast.
Well, yeah, why not? It's like a lot of carbs. They're good for like a good sporty day.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna talk about you, the pro surfer time. We're gonna talk about surfboards. But when I was like reading about you, I read that you come from Malibu, right? And since we're gonna talk about surf culture, I'm interested in something. One of the things that when we start to learn about surf, we always learn about Mickey Dora, right? And we see him in the beach of Malibu with Dora leaves, right? In your opinion, in today's surf culture, is still the same? Dora leaves? Since you are from Malibu, you should be very prepared on this topic.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I actually grew up in the Valley, which was exactly the thing that Mickey Dora made fun of, which is he called us Valley Cowboys. So I lived inland, which was maybe to my advantage. Well, at the time I did not like it, but when you grew up in the Valley, it was such an uncool place to live that it made you try harder in the water. You had to prove yourself because you didn't. Some of the surfers that I was out in the lineup with you could see their house from the water. It wasn't the case for me. But Mickey Dora, he kind of loomed over everything at Malibu. And it's interesting, recently Dora's been sort of canceled, I guess you might say. He's been supposedly, and I don't even know about supposedly. He probably was racist, anti-Semitic, et cetera, et cetera. And all those things are obviously not good. But I think the Dora that was interesting to me, and the Dora that I embraced, was really more of a symbol. It wasn't about it was really not even him. It was what he represented. And it was anti-commercialism. His thing was, he really romanticized the idea of surfing as a way to escape the hurried masses as a way of escaping, in modern day terms, we call it late capitalism. Surfing was this pure act, and the pursuit of chasing waves was, he did a great job of kind of romanticizing it and making it a very noble pursuit, and also making a joke out of it, where he would say, there was one great quote where something like, these waves are fleeting mirages, and chasing them is what I choose to do with my life. I'm paraphrasing, but it's such a lovely quote. So it's interesting with Dora, because he's had a real, posthumously, he's had a real hard time these last few years, and people have sort of scrutinized him and seen these terrible parts, and I'm not discounting them at all, and they are terrible. But I'm going to stick with the Dora symbolism that I just mentioned, which is just the kind of pure pursuit of riding waves. As surfing grows and expands and more people are interested in it, I think that that thing is even more important. It simplifies, it distills surfing down to its essence, and the idea of sort of chasing waves and making that a singular pursuit is beautiful. And as I get older and as my life expands and I have more responsibility and there are more people in my life and there's more work related stuff and there are many things that have me seated in a chair, sedentary versus out chasing waves and moving, the kind of Dora mystique, the Dora myth is one that I love.
Okay, but well, it's interesting to see the different cultures between non-Americans and Americans, I would say, because from this side of the ocean, like Dora still is one of the legendary names in surfing. There is not so much talk around what he has done bad. Of course, he was a different kind of usual person. He was an unusual person, of course, and also the perspective of maybe U.S. or California, where you start to see what he did right, what he did not do right, and maybe become kind of the controversy, that are arising over this. And I guess my personal perspective is that each surfer, if we talk about surfer, it's like a product of his own time, with his own plus and minuses. Like that. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not surprised though by what you just said, and I know that Dora spent a lot of time in the southwest of France. I think he spent time in Hungary. I know he spent time in Africa, South Africa. But the kind of the sort of wandering minstrel element to Dora's life is really, really beautiful, and that's the one that the kind of gypsy and the kind of also kind of chameleon like. There was a wonderful piece in the Surfer's Journal, and there was a kind of grid of photographs of Dora in various locations around the world, and everywhere he sort of fit in. Like there was, I think one of the shots was in Hungary, and he looked like he was Hungarian. And then there was a photo in Africa, in not South Africa, but more remote Africa, and he was dressed as if he were a tribesman. And I think those things always stuck with me. And it's interesting because as a surfer, that was really romantic. But then when I got interested in writing and became a writer, that was something that had this allure, the idea that you could go to foreign locales and kind of blend in or immerse yourself. And here's an Italianism. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Dora seemed to do that in a very epic way. And when I was young and very naive, and I still am, I saw that and thought, great. Like when I guess the thing for me is I came up the competitive ranks as a surfer, and I became a professional surfer in the 1980s, which was a very commercialized period. And I think surfing was growing. Surfing was trying to align or make itself, align itself, let's say, with golf or tennis, they were borrowing from golf and tennis as a model of how to be mainstream. And there was this effort to be mainstream. And a guy like Dora, and there were others, but Dora was probably like the biggest, the archetype and the icon for that thing. That idea of immersing in whatever culture you're in and kind of taking on all the customs and traits of that place was so wonderful for me. It shaped my life in a great way. And I was kind of shedding my LA upbringing at this time. So I was very, American, or I will say North American, because I have learned that there's a distinction, and that South and Central American people do not always like when North Americans just call ourselves Americans. So as a Norte Americano, I became very aware of the sort of privilege, entitlement, all the stuff that comes with the kind of new world and the idea of self-invention and ambition that my country represents in the world. And so traveling was so important for me to kind of shed a lot of that stuff, question a lot of that stuff, try to understand that stuff. And yeah, again, Dora and all the kind of great traveling surfers represented that. And that's one of the reasons why I love surfing so much. It's sort of baked into the surfing life is the idea of travel, right? Like if you get serious about surfing and you want to go off and ride a wave in Indonesia, you want to go to Australia and experience Byron Bay. You want to go to these like historical places and great waves. And you do that over years and decades, and then you become more well-rounded, and you become, I guess, more a citizen of the world,
Sure. Yeah. More you see, more you go out from your own little thing. It's like, of course, it's like Elvis that never toured the world and just did a show in the US, right? So if you go see the world, you can get better, and of course you see things in a very rounded way. In effect, you are talking about your years as in the pro surfing world, so in the tour. Those years, if I well remember, even the advertising that the major brands, they were doing was more like, we are rebel. If you can't surf, stay home. Don't surf with us. Kind of rebel kind attitude, and that was very close about. It was not inclusive at all.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
talk about inclusion, like giving space for everyone. It was like male dominated. We know we have seen it in Girls Can Surf, for instance. Like
Yep.
it was male dominated, pro or nothing, localism at maybe at the maximum level all over the world, and again. Okay, maybe people did not go in prison like Nicky Dora did, or didn't steal, or didn't do like punch other people. Maybe a lot of people actually, in effect, they did. We don't know. Us normal people, we don't know. Maybe you know that, but not the topic of today. And
Yeah.
so it was kind of not inclusive at all, and it was. You told me, yes, surf wanted to be like golf, like a major sport. I mean, in reality, it was very exclusive, isn't it?
Yeah, you raised a good point. And I think, and interestingly, so here's the other, like, here's the shadow side of Mickey Dora, because while he represented the one thing that I was going on about earlier, he was also very territorial, and he used the term Valley Cowboys and Hodads and all these derogatory terms for people who weren't insiders to the surf world. And I think that was there at that time. In California, surfing grew popular through the 60s, and the 70s was regarded as a decade of a lot of localism. And very different time. Now you can't get away with this stuff, but there was that era. If you were a regular at your surf break, if you lived at that surf break, you could, people would get punched out or told to leave, or their tires, flattened on their cars. There was a real, it was as you say, it was the opposite of inclusivity. And, it's interesting. I mean, I don't think it was a good thing by any means, but I also think that period and the time that I came from, as you said, there were the gotcha ads that said, if you surf, never stop. If you don't surf, don't start. If you surf, never stop. It's sort of glorifying surfing, but also doing a territorial thing at the same time, and an exclusive thing. But I will say that, like, that was just that era. That was the kind of zeitgeist of that era, and it wasn't. We weren't aware of what and when I say we, I wasn't part of the advertising, group that came up with this stuff, but that that spirit of territorialism, it was done from a naive place. And it's just, we look at it through a different lens now, I guess. But it was part of the time. And I think it's, that thing still exists though. And I believe that like most of us would rather, if the waves are really, really good, we'd rather share it with 3 or 4 of our friends than 150 people. And that's just part of surfing. And in many ways, yes, there's a built-in kind of exclusivity and territorialism to that. At the same time, what is also built into that, which I always think about, is great, great passion. Like we love surfing. And I have had arguments in the water over a beautiful wave where someone dropped in on me and I couldn't believe the kind of primal anger, that rage that came out of me and I think about it and I had an incident a few years ago where I was shouting at a guy who dropped in on me on a beautiful wave. And I kind of hated the part of me that came out. And then at the same time, when I was thinking about it later, I was like, I kind of love that because I still love this thing so much. And I love this wave so much. And I'll fight for this wave, I think some of the territorialism of surfing or the exclusivity of surfing is also a byproduct of how much we love surfing. And if we didn't love it that much, we probably wouldn't care. And so, but I'm not saying it's right. And I love that surfing has expanded. And myself as a kind of documentarian of surf culture, I love the people I get to meet that I never would have imagined I would get to meet many years ago. The people that have found surfing, it's broadened in a wonderful way. It makes it more interesting.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fun how things evolve. For instance, I don't know, Nat Young, which I interviewed, and you did as well. At the time of maybe a few years ago, a few decades of years ago, it was like a localism, and today is old in Australia, and everybody's giving him a wave because he's a legend, right?
Yeah.
And that is a respect. It's
Yes.
it goes beyond just like the ability of surfing and dropping in. It's really like recognizing that there is like a system in the lineup of priorities, respects, profession.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's interesting because I think that there is, I surf out at Malibu, and Malibu on a good south swell will have 150 people in the water. And there's not nearly enough waves, nor can you keep track of the rotation of surfers, right? So it's not really, it suddenly slides into what would be a kind of meritocracy where, or even a more Darwinian survival of the fittest, where it's like whoever is skilled enough, paddling fast enough, confident enough will get more waves than the person who's new to it. And it does become hierarchical, and it's inevitable. I mean, it's if that same day had 15 surfers in the water, you could keep track and everything could be fair, but it becomes a little bit more aggressive than that.
It's fine. It's fine like that. In effect, it's part of being a surfer. Like except maybe the one that just starting surfing, but when you know your way around, you need to have a kind of respect automatically or without counting. He got 2 waves, I got 1. Now it's my turn. Obviously.
Yeah.
When you were in the pros, you were pro surfer. You were in the tour. There were a lot of legendary names, that became world champion. Like I don't know, Tom Curran, Martin Potter, Danny Arden, Barton Lynch, then Kelly Slater right after, and others. All these names are now legends, right?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask you a question. What does it take to become a legend? Because some of them became a legend also because of the way they were not world champions, but they acted like rock stars, and they had like a kind of Mickey Dora, if you want to say, different way, but and then they became a legend because of what they were doing outside the surfing and inside the surfing as well. It's a little bit all around. And then you had people that, like, I don't know, Tom Curran, for instance, that was like really into pro surfing, like an athlete, and was able to succeed and become world champion. So, in your opinion, now that few years has passed, how do you become a legend in the surfing world?
Each case is different, right? Like, so my first trip on the world tour, I was 19 years old. It was 1986. It was the Australian leg. And at the Rip Curl Bells Beach Pro in the semifinal, Tom Curran and Mark Occhilupo, it's a really famous heat. Anyone that's really plugged into pro surfing will know this heat. And both surfers kind of surf beyond themselves. It was so spectacular to watch. The waves were fairly big and meaty and bouncy and not the easiest waves to ride. And Tom Curran had the double pump bottom turn and hitting the lip at like 1 o'clock. Aki was doing these big hacks, backhand hacks under the lip, and the entire wave would break on him and he'd emerge. And then as he's coming out of this explosion of whitewash, he'd already be into the bottom turn into the next one. And it was spectacular. We were kind of like watching surfing like 3 or 4 years down the track. They were grabbing us by the hand and going, here's what it's going to look like as we go. And, both Curran and Aki have their own sort of unique charms. In terms of being legends, I think, and legend is a word that's thrown in California, it's thrown around way too frequently. It doesn't really mean anything anymore, but I'm going to try to get at what you mean by legend, which I understand what you mean. I think in the case of these people we're talking about, there's a level of kind of endurance where they don't just have a little flashing moment and then they're gone. They continue and they evolve and mature well. And as you say, Alessandro, and I think it's a good point, like it's not always about your skill set. One of the kind of perfect description of a legend from my era is a surfer, Matt Hoy from Newcastle, Australia. And Matt's an unbelievably good surfer, but he never won a world champion. I don't know if he ever even won an event, but he was charismatic. He had a real honesty to him. Another surfer, Robbie Page from my era, he'd won the Pipeline Masters 1 year, but Robbie was also just a kind of really raw character and very honest and funny and unique. So I guess if I were to try to get at what it is, the first ingredient is being a really, really skilled surfer to where people are paying attention to you. But then once the eyeballs and the media and the cameras, et cetera, are trained on you, then it's sort of like, well, what charm might you have that's going to be more than just your surfing skill? What sort of characteristics are connecting with people? And I guess all of it, if you round it all out, it becomes like what it means to be a surfer or why we love surfing. And so I think a lot of the legends of the sport, they all they're all their own sort of flavor, but when you put the flavors all together, it's like, this is surfing right here. This is who surfers are. This is this group, this tribe of quote unquote legends represent the surfer persona or the surfing ethos. And I don't think it's one thing. Again, it starts with really good surfing, and then it becomes, by being visible, you get to know the person or the persona that they've created, and you connect with it, and then you continue to connect with it. And we're still fascinated by Tom Curran. We're still fascinated by Mark Occhilupo. We're still fascinated by Nat Young. Wayne Lynch is still a big figure in Australian surfing. He's well into his 70s. So, and the other thing, I find this, the first show I ever went to as a punk rock fan when I was young was Iggy Pop. I was 14, and I was so into Iggy. What I saw on stage was so appealing to me at age 14. And I was a skateboarder and a surfer at that time, and punk rock was new, but the way he moved, all of it, the things he said via his lyrics, the way the music charged me up. And so, all these years later, like I'm still fascinated by Iggy and what he does and how he lives and how he moves through the world. And I think the kind of surfing legends, the ones we care about, it's sort of wanting to see how they progress. I was recently in Australia spending time with Steph Gilmore, who's won 8 world titles and is now onto a new chapter of her life, being more of a quote unquote free surfer, where she'll probably do a lot of trips with Rip Curl, The Search, be in a lot of films. I was thinking about it a lot. Like we love Steph. Like Stephanie Gilmore is such a beloved character in the surf world. And now that she's sort of won so many world titles and hoisted so many trophies over her head, and we have that indelibly marked in our brains as seeing her that way, now that she's sort of shape-shifting into something else, do we want to see it? Absolutely. And I think that there are probably a lot of younger girls who might look to it and go, okay, how do you be a surfer at age in your 30s and beyond? You know, what does sort of this progression or transition look like and mean? And to me, like so many of our kind of heroes are that. We look to them and we're looking for cues and clues, and we're looking for lessons as to how to do this, how to do it, you know?
Yeah.
I do the podcast with the Surfer's Journal, and I find myself frequently, it seems like such a strange question, but at the end of the conversations, especially with a lot of the older folks who have, you know, Jock Sutherland, Nat Young, et cetera, I will sometimes just say, what's the good life? Like how do you live the good life? You know?
Right.
So it's almost, I guess it kind of, I know I'm being long-winded, I'll stop, but it sometimes expands beyond just the surfing, and it becomes just, what do you do every day? How do you spend your hours on Earth, you know?
But being long is not a problem, in effect, but it generates a kind of overlap of questions in my brain, and then now I need to prioritize all of them. But you know, like the point of surf being a legend, you know, it's like an iconic product. You know, what makes an iconic product? What makes a legend? You know, and of course, you were saying you need to be a surfer. You need to be a great surfer. You know, because I don't think, at least in my memory, if my memory serves me right, I don't remember a very bad surfer that became a legend. You know, you had to master the art of surfing in a way and another. You know, and definitely is a starting point. But then, you know, like the legends, you know, that we discussed today, you know, being old surfer or contemporary ones, like Steph Gilmore or Kelly Slater, you know, they are living legends. Know what we say? They are like it's actually complicated. And in fact, I ask you because I cannot answer myself. You know, I asked, for instance, I asked Greg Knoll, you know, do you feel like a legend? And he told me, no, I feel like I was with my friends surfing in Waimea and having a peanut butter sandwich on the shore. And I just feel like I haven't not done nothing to be a legend. I just done what I liked. And still today, he surfs in all our imagination that Waimea Bay, right? We see it portrayed in pictures, in documentaries, in anything. And that becomes a legend, no? The legend of Greg Noah, the legend of Mickey Munoz, the legend of those Hawaiian, Californian guys that were in Hawaii, and they represented fantastic time in the sport. At the same time, I ask the same question to Herbie Fletcher, and he tells me, yes, I'm a fucking legend.
Herbie's good like that.
Yes. Well, of course, I would not have expected any other answer than this. I would not have expected the Greg Knoll answer. Though, two different words, you know, what makes them legend? And still, it's very complicated to me to answer. And the other question is like, in today's world, for instance, Italo Ferreira or modern world champions, you know, like are just great athletes, but they are not yet legend. No? Maybe it would need some time to have push some space for them to become legend. No, I don't know. Maybe it's a matter of time. Maybe you need decades or 2 decades to become a legend or something like.
No, I think that's a good point, Alessandro, and I think it's maybe the part that we're getting at here is the sort of character of the surfer, right? Because like it's one thing to watch Italo or Gabby Medina fly across a wave and do some incredible move that, you know, inspires us tremendously, and we are so thrilled and excited. But that's a different thing from being someone who we admire in their, you know, the choices they've made in their lives and what have you. So yeah, I mean, I think honestly, and I've seen enough of it now where I didn't realize this at the time. When I was a professional surfer, I was a pro surfer from age 19 to about 25. You know, I didn't really think beyond that. And I think the beautiful thing about like chasing your surf dream is it's so all consuming. You don't necessarily want to have a plan B or like a some fallback thing. You bet everything you have on this life. And what happens is it's short-lived. And then in my case, it was 25, and a more successful surfer might have gone till they're 30 or what have you. But typically there's going to be like at least a second half of one's life that they're going to have to face that's not going to be a surf star anymore or a pro surfer.
But do you regret stopping at 25?
No, I actually don't. And I was on tour for 5 years. I always hovered in around 40s on the rankings. I never got up to the 20s, or the top 16 or the top 10 or any of that. And I got to go around the world, and I got to be friends with, I got to ride all the great waves. I was friends with all these folks we're talking about now, and I still am. So I'm really grateful for the whole experience. I'm glad I stopped. I wish I could have kept going, but Quicksilver was my sponsor. And after 5 years, they said, you're not progressing the way we'd hoped. We have to cut your sponsorship. And it broke my heart at the time. But I lived in Sydney, Australia, and I had a friend, Andrew Kidman, who was the editor of Waves magazine. And I started working with him. And I started working at a magazine and basically, helping edit photos, writing caption for photos, writing articles, writing music reviews, film reviews, etc. And I stepped into this new thing that was so exciting. And I'm honestly so glad that I did it at age 25 than 30. I could have tried to continue being a pro and traveling. And I did keep traveling, but I just did it as a journalist, not as a competitor. But I'm really happy. As soon as I stopped competing, I felt like the world opened up in a way, because there's a real narrow focus to being a competitor.
Yes.
It's great. It's great trying to mine that part of yourself. It's great. I'm so thankful to have experienced the kind of conversation with myself that was trying to like extract the inner Superman, like trying to just be the best athlete I can be. But it's also a very narrow way to live. And as soon as I stopped, and as soon as I met writers and poets, and I lived in Sydney, Australia, which was a perfect little city. It was small enough to where I was just insatiably curious, and I threw myself at, I wanted to be around all the things that I wasn't around as an athlete. And as soon as I started seeing all the other ways to live, I thought, gosh, I'm so glad I'm done with this. So I was very happy to step out of it when I did.
But Jamie, I don't know. I don't want to say something like that is not impactful, but from our perspective, so from the other side of the camera, you are, remember, even if you are not on the top 20 or 4, you are remember like one of those guys, and in a certain way, we go back on your impact in the surf culture is much bigger than those 4 years of pro tour, which is fantastic from my perspective, because people like you, they respect you. They should maybe give you priority all the time while you take away.
I wish it went that way. It really doesn't. But it's very nice of you to say, and I do appreciate that, and that does mean a lot to me, because I do care deeply about surfing, and I've poured my life into it in so many ways. And yeah, I guess for me, my love of surfing came very, very young, and the way for me to, in many ways, I look back and I think, the way I became I was an amateur competitor. I did well. I won contests a lot. It was fairly easy for me. And I, had a really great trajectory as an amateur on the California coast, on the West Coast of the USA. When I turned pro and went out on the tour, I didn't do as well. But again, I just loved it. I loved surfing and the surf culture and the people. And I was enamored of my fellow competitors. I was enamored of the surfers I was supposed to try to beat in a heat. I would be, competing against Gary Kong Elkerton and looking over at him, trying to watching how cool he was, the way he wiped his board down and waxed his board and put on his wetsuit and all those things. I was still kind of a surf fan, even though I went out and beat him at a couple of times, So it was this really strange thing, but I think I definitely felt far more myself when I stepped off the pro tour and stopped trying to be this kind of warrior athlete, which I don't think I ever fully was. And when I got to allow curiosity and maybe like humanity to drive me forward and to just be interested in people's stories and to observe really and watch. And I do feel like it's been this kind of long anthropological study of a culture. And for me, it's funny, I was talking to Matt Warshaw, who does the Encyclopedia of Surfing, the other day about this. And were both laughing. And I said to Matt, in many ways, like surfing is a microcosm for me to understand the world. Like I wish I had the education or the bandwidth to I wish I don't wish, but had I gone to Harvard or something or an Ivy League school, I might have a different kind of understanding of the way the world works. But surfing is the little microcosm that I understand the world through, and it's manageable and it's small enough that I can see it. And having done it for many years now and watching my peers grow and watching them evolve into midlife and beyond, it feels like I'm doing this long kind of case study of how to live, really, like what is meaningful and and I see, and there's as many cautionary tales as there are inspirations. Like I feel like I often see my peers or some of the generation older than me, and I think that's not the way to do it.
Mm.
So
No, but like we don't all need to be Ivy League people, like if we or experts, like I think in the microcosm, if like you are you experience what does it mean like being a pro surfer, and then you experience what is to be like to be a writer, and a certain way, an historian, like in a certain way, because you tell stories, right? And so that happened, the real stuff, not that, not like unreal story. So all that together makes you in the surf culture, in this microcosm, somebody to look up to. And so is the reason why people like I am nobody, but people like me contact you and say like, can we have a chat? Can we have a discussion? Because you are representing our work. And I think you gain that through sweats and tears and fights and everything that is your life brought to you. So I think is a great thing. Is a great acknowledgement from people.
thank you.
No?
No, I appreciate that, Alessandro, and I'm flattered.
It was a matter of saying the truth. I'm not flattering you. It's just I really believe what I'm saying. So
Yeah, well, that's nice. No, but the thing though that I've come to realize is, I mean, for me, it's not something I think about. It's not something I like sit down in and feel comfortable there. Like I think sometimes our driving forces can be kind of setting a high standard for what we want to do or what we aspire to. And it's never about kind of resting on one's laurels, or it's never about there's no part of me that's like, I've achieved something in the surf world. I don't wake up thinking about that at all. I think about like what the next project is or what's interesting. So it's nice. But it does. I mean, I honestly, I'm flattered, and it feels good to know that, and it feels good to have. If I've inspired anyone, I'm thrilled about that in a positive way, I should say. But I just feel like a student every day. Honestly, I mean, it's. I guess I'm thankful that I have, and I do think this is part of surfing, because for me, it's mostly writing. I do a podcast with the Surfers Journal. There's a curiosity and there's a sense of wonder, and the wonder is the thing I want to keep alive most of all. And I see when I look around me to sort of how to live, I think that curiosity, wonder, a certain innocence, I suppose, and a certain optimism, because I think people can get cynical as they get older. I'm trying to retain all of that, and I think that is. Surfing is a great place to be feeling that, because I think that is part of the surf experience. And we get that, every morning we go for a surf and there's like seagulls playing at the shoreline, and the water comes up and splashes at our feet, and we dive in and we paddle out and flop around and ride waves. There's a kind of like childlike wonder to it all that is it's different to an office setting, or it's different to a kind of power hierarchy where, you're trying to be a baller in whatever thing that you're doing.
Totally. Curiosity, it makes you genuine for instance, in your podcast, because you are there because you are curious about the person that you are interviewing, the person you are dealing, and it's not just a job. I sit down and I do a podcast. It's just about exchanging, try to understand what are the other person experience in life, and it's not just like reading a script. Then it would be super boring. I guess for you, because you're a curious person like me, I'm curious, but also for the people that listen, it's just like they don't want to hear what is the story of the guest or the host from A to Z. They want to go and discover and listen new stuff, and I think you do perfectly well. So I have actually I'm thinking about two things. And I have to free my mind of these two questions. So the first thing is actually I also heard you saying in some other podcast or article that I wrote preparing this interview is that at that time people were preparing so much and to be an athlete to be on the tour, and then in the tour like they were drinking beer, not sleeping at night, doom party, eating crap food and whatnot. So it looked like at that time, not everyone, of course, did that, but being an athlete was not necessarily like the first thing on the to-do list, right? You were there, you were performing like an athlete, not you specifically. I'm talking about generic people. But then the party part seems to be more important, if you want to say, or maybe legendary than the real sport athleticism. Do I say something that is not correct?
No, I think you're very right, and I think that's very accurate. And I think it's a different, if you looked at the pro tour of today and the top pros, they're very much serious athletes. But the era that I came up in, I think surfing was kind of torn between the two. There were surfers who were very serious about training. There was Tom Curran took it very seriously. Tom Carroll took it very seriously. But then there was also this sort of spirit of what might have been like coming from more the 70s and even the kind of late 60s shortboard revolution where there were a lot of psychedelics, as I understand it. So, and then I think like Australia figured largely into my surf experience when I was coming up and when I was a pro, and there was hard drinking, it was like, there was a point of pride to be able to like knock back a lot of pints of beer at the pub, and it was a macho kind of thing. And I think I look back honestly, and I mean it was kind of silly. It was kind of very like immature, kind of frat boy college type thing where it was like, you would prove yourself by like being the last man standing at the bar kind of thing. But that was part of it. And I think in some ways, sometimes like just living the perfect athlete life can make you insane. And I think that sometimes it was almost like an acting out or rebelling. It was almost like, the spirit of surfing, where it was a bunch of countercultural sort of outcasts and people who were not playing the mainstream, playing the status quo. It was almost as if like those ghosts kind of got hold of us and took us into other places that were totally not what you'd expect out of an athlete. And it did, the longest leg on the tour was the Europe leg, and it started in Newquay, England, with the Foster's Pro. And if you lost early, you would go to the pub, and everyone would gather at the pub and tell stories and rub shoulders. And it was very like what we now know of as like community, and what we now know of as like the antidepressant that is being around other people and talking, like the oxytocin of looking people in the eye and patting them on the back and touching them. Like we did that, like a very kind of bro thing. And then the next leg was 3 events in France. It was Lacanau, Hossegor, and Biarritz in the southwest of France. And then there were 2 events in Spain, as I remember. Some years there were just one, the Pucas Pro and in around Zerouts. And then there would be a Portuguese event, and then the next event from there was Brazil, and no one kind of went home. So there was this like almost 2 months of being away from home, and you could almost like track the way everyone started with like bright eyes and bushy tails and optimistic and hopeful and doing everything right. And then if you cut to like 3 weeks later, people were kind of sliding. And by the time you got to the end with Brazil, which was, had its temptations, it became like, it was like a joke how much everyone was partying. Like people would go raging all night long and show up to the beach the next day, kind of still high from the night before. But the thing is like the stakes were not as high as they are today. That you weren't earning the money that you are now. You weren't buying multiple homes, and you weren't going to like happily retire. There was a spirit that I'm thankful for, which was, it was kind of like we were all looking at each other thinking, can you believe that our sponsors actually pay for us to go ride great waves around the world? And this isn't going to last forever. And therefore, we're in whatever Biarritz, and if you got knocked out of the contest, there's these nightclubs that you could go to that would go till dawn. And why not throw yourself in? Or, and this is the Basque Country, right? So there was like the French Basque Country, the Spanish Basque Country there, and this was in the summertime. There would be these various like specifically Basque events, and we wanted to participate. So some of the partying was done with a little bit of what I said earlier, which, pardon the cliche, but like the when in Rome, do as the Romans do. It was sort of like, let's just join in on the fun here because this is a way to, we're not going to get to do this at home,
I'm very close to the, of course, European Osegor, Biarritz surf scene. And sometimes, like when I go and I sit down with the surfboard shapers or people in the surf culture, they all tell me, Alessandro, those years in Osegor, the parties and the irons, everyone, it was fantastic. And obviously in Europe, everybody is very upset that the Osegor Pro is not there anymore. There is no stop of the tour. But apart of that, the community was living with you guys, all these fantastic stories that are, in a certain way, everybody is like, saying on the ear of somebody else, and then becomes like a legend, like become like the best party ever existed in the world. But I guess it's interesting from a perspective of today. You see every participant in the in the tour that are like preparing themselves like super serious athletes, and they are like portraying their the figure of being like a professional athlete. Of course they are, because they are in the tour. But it's fantastic, at least to me, to see that, at that time, people they were like having 2-3 beers and go in the sea, and they were doing things that still people were like, oh my God, what happened? How fantastic was that maneuver or that wave?
Yeah, I have a really great memory of one of my Australian friends on tour was a real partier, and we were in Spain. And at that time, the contests were almost this novelty. Like there were plenty of people who went down to the contest who really didn't know much about surfing. But they happened to be like holidaying there with their families, and there was this spectacle of a surf contest that ran for 5 days. So on one of the nights, my friend went kind of out all night long. He had the first heat of the morning, and he went straight from the nightclub over to the contest, and he looked like, drunk. He was still kind of drunk. And the waves were very, very small. And it's a bright, sunny morning, and he grabs his board, puts on his jersey, and goes and paddles out. And it was really interesting because he surfed beautifully, and you wouldn't know anything. But then about halfway through the heat, he's kind of like weaving back and forth and doing these very active, alive sort of movements. And as he gets towards the inside, and there's like a bunch of people standing in knee-deep water watching, like families with their kids and stuff. As he's riding along, he just sort of pauses, leans over, while standing on his board, pukes out all the beer from last night, and then gains composure and keeps riding down the line and keeps doing turns.
Exactly.
But yeah, it was incredibly fun. And it was, again, though, it's sort of that thing of like what you said about Greg Knoll earlier, where at the time we were just in our early 20s and having fun and enjoying the fact that we were on the other side of the world, and we were quote unquote these pro surfers, like we just, I think there's a part of us that kind of couldn't believe our good luck there. And to that, I think I'm glad it was like a humble place to be where, and I think, as I say, like the stakes have gotten higher, and there's now a couple generations of pros who have set themselves up very nicely financially, and they're, national heroes in their countries and what have you. It kind of wasn't like that then. And as a result, there was a lot more play and a lot more fun and irresponsibility, you might say. I'm glad I got to be a part of it.
Definitely. We are glad that you were part of it because you gave us a legendary moment to look at art. Do you think you said it twice? So I wanted to ask you one thing. You talk about the money part a couple of times during the interview. You hint about it. There is more money today, or there was more money back then. And when I'm saying it, when I'm asking it, I'm thinking about, obviously there is much more money today, but I think it's concentrated on very, very few. And at that time, maybe cost of living, I don't know, maybe traveling was maybe more expensive than today, but maybe there was the same level of money or more, but was more divided across more people. What do you think? I don't know if I say something wrong, historically wrong, but I feel like there was more opportunity for more surfer back then than today.
I think you might be right. And here's the thing, that period my generation was when the surf industry was booming. I mean, Quicksilver had gone IPO, so they were publicly traded. They were making unprecedented numbers. Billabong was huge. Gotcha was a brand that was huge at that time. And I think you're right. I think it was maybe they spread it out more. They had like their top 5 surfer, but then there were also a lot of lower ones that they were kind of almost investing in, like betting on a horse, right? Like maybe that person's going to go on to be great. Whereas now, the industry is sort of, what do you call it? Like it's disassembled, it's decentralized. Like we don't even know. The juggernauts of the 80s and 90s and aughts are no longer there. And it's really changed. But when I was on the tour, there was not a lot of money, and we were really doing it hand to mouth. And I can remember selling wetsuits and surfboards to pay for my hotel bill to go on to the next event.
Okay. Wow. So those lucky guys that bought a surfboard from you, if they still have it, it's a good trophy today.
Well, it was really funny because a lot of the contests at the end, the events would start on a Wednesday and end on a Sunday. And you hope that you would be there till Sunday, but typically, for myself, I would be done by Friday. And then on the Saturday, when all of the people were there to watch, there was almost like a yard sale of pro surfers selling their gear so that they could get on to the next event. And so, yeah, there was a lot of selling of gear.
Fantastic. I mean, from a collector perspective, yes, it's a fantastic thing. Back in the day, I wish we could go back to the. Anyway, which surfboard you were surfing those times? I don't actually.
So I surfed almost all of my life. I've ridden Channel Islands, shaped by Al Merrick.
Okay.
There was a time when I was trying different boards. I got boards from Rusty for a while. I got boards from Terry Richardson in Australia. I got a really great Morris Cole once while I was in France. But most of my career, I rode Channel Islands.
So how was your relationship with the legendary figure of course, our sport is Merrick, right? So how was your relationship with it?
Really great. I joined the Channel Islands team when I was 15 years old. Al was such a great mentor. He was kind of a man of few words. He didn't say an awful lot, but he kind of taught by example. He was a Christian man, so he had high moral compass. He was a family man. At that time, my family was kind of falling apart, so there was a real comfort in being around him. I remember going to get my board shaped, and in his shaping room would be these templates, and they had, Tom Curran and Sean Thompson and Barton Lynch and Willie Morris and all the best surfers of the time you just felt that you were in this room full of like this is the factory where all the not the factory but the shaping room where all the best surfers get their boards. It was a really fun relationship. This was before the shaping machine, so there was a lot of just simple, like, you'd give feedback and I would bring my old board and he would be measuring it up and I'd be telling him what I liked and what I didn't like about it. And then he would apply that to the new board that he was shaping. But it was a fun relationship. It was really great, interesting relationship.
A few moments ago, you were talking about the famous say challenge between Tom Curran and Otzi, and I think that surfboard was called the Black Beauty, right? So
yes,
Tom Curran won, and that became a legendary surfboard for like a generation. Everybody had to add one Black Beauty, and Merrick, of course, was behind that. And I remember when I discussed with the photographer Jimmy Metico about, he did a book, right, on
yes,
Coren and Almeric. And he was telling me, Alessandro, of course I was shooting, looking at the sea, the waves, but what was going behind me in the beach, on the shore, it was fantastic, to see Almeric sitting, and most probably you were there, right, that time?
Yes.
So
it was a wonder.
What was going on the beach?
Well, so I came up through the amateur ranks. There was the NSSA, which was spearheaded by Peter Townend and Ian Cairns, both Australians. And they were really trying to prepare the amateur surfers for the pro ranks. One of the things they really valued in the NSSA was length of ride. The idea of, like, if you take a wave, you milk it all the way to the shore. You ride until your fins hit the sand. So Al Merrick did these team workouts that were really great. They were like the second Wednesday of every month or something like that. But we would all gather on the beach up in Santa Barbara. And he had a kind of flag that he set up on the beach. And the idea was that if you wanted a wave to count in your heat, you had to ride it and then run up and go around the flag. So he was encouraging you to ride the wave as long as possible, because obviously the longer you ride it, the less you have to run. So yeah, I think it was, what was interesting is it was really just, we were trying to find our way into a more rigorous, professional, athletic kind of approach, So it was just very hands-on, very active. Al was there all the time. Al was on the beach and he was watching all of his team riders. And that goes for, that was happening at the amateur events, but then when the OP Pro or the Stubbies came to California, where the pro ones, Al would be there as well. And it was really like, we were just trying to gather information and figure out how to do this. It was exciting in that way. And it was really about, like, reaching for higher parts of ourselves. And I know that sounds like romanticizing it, but it really, I now think about what it means to be a serious athlete. It's a deep relationship with yourself. It's very internalized. It's very much like you are constantly, your mind is sort of ticking over. The word manifest is used a lot right now. Like, people will say, oh, I manifested my house that I live in, or whatever. Like, manifesting, we called it creative visualization. There was a book by Shakti Gawain that was big in the 70s. And it was about, like, I learned through this book that if I had a contest in 2 weeks, if I had the OP Pro at Huntington Beach, the more I could imagine how that day will go, waking up in the morning, what I'm going to eat for breakfast, what it's going to feel like to change into my wetsuit in the parking lot, walk across the sand, get my jersey from the beach marshal, paddle out into my heat, ride those waves in the shadow of the pier, going, there was a section in Huntington where the wave would kind of go fat and you had to kind of bounce to make it to the inside. The more I played that out in my head, the more preparation, the more likely I would be to realize that and to win. That was just going constantly. So I didn't think of it at the time, because all I was doing was I was a very ambitious, kid who wanted to be wanted to be a successful pro surfer. I look at it now and think, wow, what a unique kind of thing to have playing over and over in my head. What a unique thing to focus on.
Yes, no, definitely is a great teaching. Is what professional, Formula One drivers, they're doing, when they go visualizing every turn and every curve they have to do it on the racetrack and things like that. It's something that is it's quite known, but back then not necessarily so.
No, that's exactly that. Thank you for that, Alessandro, because that's exactly what I was about to say. Is like now it's a science. Now we know it. Now it's almost a cliche.
Yeah.
We have all this terminology around it. Back at the time that I was doing it, it was really just it was a novel thing. It was kind of as I say, we were just making it up as we went along, or we were trying to figure it out. So that we were all sharing our notes on this. And Al Merrick, the shaper of Channel Island surfboards, was a big figure in that, and he was so influential to so many of us because he was the one that was seeing a lot of that and sharing it along. Ian Cairns and Peter Townend with the NSA, they were doing the same. And being, 15, 16 years old, and that was my preoccupation versus like going to the high school party and trying to like drink a bunch of beers and get laid. It took me to another place and introduced me to a lot of kind of like life skills that I apply today, and I apply them as a writer every day. It was as hedonistic and fun as pro surfing was in the 80s, there was that other side to it that was like very serious actually, and very useful in how to live and hold yourself together.
Yeah. I don't remember if Brad Garlock was at the same time you were on the tour or more. Or
Brad and I met when we were 15, and Brad was a massive inspiration. And he's another example of what I said earlier, which is like he was one of my dear friends. He was one of my peers. We had many serious heats together, but he was also like a hero of mine. I learned so much from him. And Brad was very bright, like just so, Brad was so inspiring and so into all the very stuff I'm talking about. It's so interesting that he does the wave key now, because even back then,
yeah,
he was dissecting technique. I remember being in Reunion Island with Brad. There was a contest at Saint Lou, which is now a very shark infested spot that I don't even know if it's open, but it was this long left-hand reef. And I remember seeing, it was the day before the contest. We'd all been out practicing and learning the wave. And I went to go get a smoothie at some place, and I ran into Brad, and we were talking, and he was saying like, Jamie, I figured out this thing. When you come off the bottom backside, you kind of put your shoulders like this, and as you come off the top, you put your head down, and your board just follows. It's exactly the stuff he does with wave key now.
Yeah.
And again, it was passion, it was obsession, it was someone so deep into this practice that he devoted himself to. And it's really cool watching this again, going back to the kind of like case study or anthropological study where like Brad's still doing that today. That part of him that is now a coach and a kind of teacher, it was there when Brad was 19, 18 years old.
Though the reason why I raised his name is the fact that when I discussed with him, he told me, Alessandro, we were alone. We didn't have a coach. We had, like you said, for you, Al Merrick was part of your family because, of course, I don't know your family situation back then, but he was part of your family. He was a familiar figure, like the other competitor were friends, and maybe they were coming like with their parents or so other familiar figure, but everybody was kind of abandoned to themselves. And so when he was speaking with him, he was telling me, Alessandro, I could have done much more if I had a coach, if somebody was there helping me, focusing or doing the right thing, and maybe not to have fun more, not to take hard on myself. And he was like referring to the fact that, in effect, you guys were kind of abandoned to yourself. Of course, you were very, you were very famous, a lot of media around you guys. You were like good looking. You were all the things that you can possibly have. But at the end, you were like kids, if you want to say, all by them. And today, if we translate that into the modern time, today, behind one pro surfer that is not even a champion, maybe number 18, 20, I don't know. So that there is a huge life coach, support team, mental illness, no, mental illness, sorry, mental health, mental
Oh,
health.
absolutely. And I think it was two things. One, there wasn't the money to hire all those people. And two, we didn't even know that like I was going to say, like, what we're talking about here is a kind of infrastructure. Like if you're Gabriel Medina and you're like the best thing that's going to come out of Brazil and be launched into the world and become a world champion, there's going to be a kind of infrastructure that's supporting that, right? But we didn't even think in those terms back then. That's what I mean by we were making it up as we went along. I think like the generation that I was a part of was laying foundations for what we now see, which is that life coach and that like all the various kind of voices in that athlete's head to keep them on track and make them the best they can be. That was not there back then. And again, this is where we were sort of looking to maybe like golf and tennis for inspiration, because I distinctly remember I was really into tennis at that time. And I remember there was a player, Boris Becker, who was huge, and he was about my age, so I was always really inspired by him. But he had a coach, and his name was Jan Tiriak. I can still see his face, and he would be sitting in the bleachers watching and doing his thing. And when you watch Wimbledon or whatever, the camera would go to that. We didn't have that back then. We did have, Derek Hine was a coach for a while, and Derek Hine was a fascinating figure. He coached Aki. He coached the Billabong team for a while, and then he started coaching Rip Curl, and I was a Rip Curl sponsored surfer. So Derek became my coach, and Derek was absolutely amazing. And I look back now, and I think Derek was not only a great coach as an athlete, but he was just a really fascinating mind. And by virtue of being his sort of student, I got kind of a window into how he saw things that was really I'm still drawing from today.
Yeah, of course. You had those kind of figures that were like all around it. Today, there was impossible to find somebody like him. That take care of everything. It's like it's crazy. Like I don't know. Maybe at a certain point we became more specialized, but
yeah,
the other part we regressed in a way in our abilities to be closer and to coach people. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right or wrong. So I have one more question regarding surfboards. You said all the surfboard that you were riding, but you regret of one surfboard that you really wanted to ride, but you, professionally speaking, but you had no chance to ride because maybe you were because of American, you couldn't. Because of your sponsor, you regret or you would have loved to ride one instead of the one that you had?
No, the thing was I had I also rode Greg Weber's boards from he shaped Insight boards. Greg was a fantastic shaper. No, it was really interesting because there was a thing where I think ultimately, like most shapers wanted loyalty and they wanted that relationship and the feedback. It was really like, it was a kind of ongoing dialogue about surfboards. And I had that with Al, but I think when I was out on the world tour, he was very open and he would allow me to try other boards.
Okay.
And I think in many ways, he was aware of the fact that it may not be the greatest thing in a marketing sense, that might be the best thing. But in terms of, if this is just one big long education as to how to be a better shaper, it may not hurt for some of the sponsored surfers to try some other boards.
Yeah, I was not afraid of other people, I guess.
Yes.
Knew that people.
Yeah. So I did get to try other boards. And there was one board one of the amazing surfboards in my life was a Terry Richardson 6'4", 19 1/4, 2.5, 6-channel swallowtail thruster. And it was the first board that Richo ever made me. And the channels it was not the most forgiving surfboard. The 6 channels, they were deep gutter channels. They gave a lot of speed, but then they were a little more edgy than a flat bottom board or like a V bottom board. But I remember I got one of the best results of my life in Brazil at the Sundeck Classic in Ubatuba, Brazil. I lost in the semifinal to Robbie Page, who was my dear friend at the time. But the board really, like that thing of a magic surfboard, I think the board really was magic. And I built this relationship with the board that was so, it was so beautiful. Like I just knew the board so well. I knew it was under my feet in a way that felt like I could kind of purely express myself. And in that particular contest, I think it was the board somehow, the way it was a sort of beach break peak that was mostly a left. The board went really well backhand. And I had like one of the most intimate surfing experience in my life, because that thing I was talking about earlier where you visualize, I was visualizing winning the event. Like I thought to myself, I can win this event. And it was in Brazil. There were a lot of events on tour. A couple of the best surfers, maybe Tom Curran, maybe Aki, were not there. So a couple of the folks that like were the like at the gates of the top were not there. And I remember thinking, I can win this event. And I visualized it so intensely. I went so deep into my head that I almost felt like I won it. Like even though I lost in the semifinal and got third, I saw it's almost, my memories are almost more clear of actually what it was going to look like to win it. And I don't know, I wish I had like a real, I wish I could better articulate what I'm trying to get at, but it was, it made me aware when I think of it, it was a thing of like competitive sport and athleticism can seem like a very jock pursuit. But now as a writer for many, many years and as a writer of fiction, there's inner life, there's an imagination that gets piqued when you're an athlete that is so, it's closer to being an artist, I think, than an athlete in many ways. And that I experienced that during this time. And it was with this surfboard, and the board was like this appendage. It was kind of part of me. I can still feel its edges and rails and everything right now.
Wow. Well, in fact, I think when I conclude the interview, I usually do a short Q&A session, and I ask the best surfboard that you ever rode. So I guess you gave me the answer for that question.
Yeah.
Cool. So before the 5 more of this very quick question, just the last one, are you working on something particular now that you like to share, or is like business as usual? So you continue with the podcast and writing a lot.
I'm working on a long prose poem called In the Malibu Parking Lot, and it's part fiction, part nonfiction, but it's a lot of memories from my Malibu life and also things that are happening in the present day. And I've been enjoying writing it. I wake up every morning and that's the first thing I go to.
I like to have, when you do something like that and you wake up and you want to write, means that it's your inner passion, you're not forced.
Yes, absolutely.
And that gets the genuinity of it, so the authenticity. So wow.
Yeah.
Looking forward to hear more news. So the short Q&A session, we answered me the first answer. The first question. The second question is you're actually the best shaper of all time, in your opinion.
I think Al Merrick, yeah.
Personal question, your favorite song or kind of music?
A couple days ago, I was listening to The Germs. They're an LA punk band, and I was really enjoying Darby Crash, the singer, and the way he growls in his voice. And as I was driving down the freeway, I was thinking, I'm almost riding in his throat right now with that growling voice. So yeah, The Germs. Germs.
Favorite surf spot, if it's not a secret, of course.
I've had beautiful moments at Sunset Beach in Hawaii, because it's just such a kind of mysterious wave of like a big long playing field. But those memories go way back. I don't know how I would do out at Sunset today with more crowds, but if I get a wave at Malibu, it's so full of memory, and it's almost like a comfort food. It's almost like, probably like if we went back and suckled from our mother's breast, that's a little bit what it feels like to ride a wave at Malibu for me.
Okay. But there is no place like home, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Favorite surfer of all time?
Tom Curran.
Totally agree. Last question is a little bit unusual. I would like to know your best relationship advice, when with the relationship you can answer romantic, friendship, relationship with the ocean, anything you want.
I like this very much. Humility, I think. I think the thing that I keep learning more and more is that this has been kind of rejigged in various ways, but there's the expression of the difference between dumb people and smart people. Dumb people think they know everything. Smart people know that they know nothing. And I feel like my daily lesson is that I know that I know how little I know, and staying open to learn is a big part of that. So I think, that applies to romantic relationships, that applies to friendships, and that applies to my relationship with the ocean for sure, is just going into it kind of humbly and very open.
Of course, I think now it applies to a lot of things in life, but I guess it's an advantage to be humble and humility as an asset, not as a weakness, right? So
yes, for sure.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for being on the show with me. I look forward to talk to you very soon.
No, thank you, Alessandro. It's been loads of fun. I really appreciate it.
Goodbye.
Okay, bye.
Hi, it's me again. I hope you enjoyed our today's episode. If you want to know more about us, please follow www.thetempleofsurf.com and all our social media. Mahalo!